Hey everybody, I'd like to do a short video showing you guys some of the mods that we've done to our Winnebago View. This is a 2020 Winnebago View 24J. We bought it used probably about a year ago, and we've been on a bunch of weekend trips and a couple of one-week trips so far, and we really love it. It's just perfect. So I'll go through some of the mods that we've done. Now most of these mods are just kind of personal preference or preventative maintenance, and there's one that when we get to it I'll show you that I think is really a must-do for if you have this model of View or Navion. So what we'll do is we'll just start at the front and work our way back, and then we'll jump on the inside and we'll talk about those. Okay, first up is the horn mod. These SV30 Sprinter, Mercedes Sprinter chassis have a really wimpy horn, just a single little horn that's not very loud. So I upgraded this with two aftermarket horns, and you can see right there's one right there and then one right here. So I got these on Amazon. They were about $63 for the set. You can also get them on Agile Off-Road, and they're about $100, and those come with a bracket, a pre-made wire harness and a bracket. I just made up my own wire harness here, and I made a little aluminum bracket and bolted it to the side there and bolted this one up there. It makes a big difference. It's one of those things where you don't really need it till you need it, but it's pretty easy mod. The front grille comes off. There are just three screws that are on the top of this grill, and then some snaps around the bottom. You just pull it out and it just snaps right off. So it's a pretty simple mod and it's easy to do. All right, next up I added sealant between the Mercedes roof and the Winnebago cap. Now in mine there was no sealant in there at all, and water can get in there, that gap between above the windshield. What happens is it works its way back and it can drip from that center console there. Also it can cause problems with the electronics inside. So what I did was I took a small syringe like this and I squeezed it. I used just RV clear silicone sealant, and I squeezed it in that gap, and with this little tiny nozzle I could get it back probably a half an inch or so back in that gap, and then squeeze the sealant so it would come out. So it's not just a fillet on the outside, it's sealed pretty far in there. And I think this looks a lot nicer than just using a caulking gun and trying to smear the sealant across the top. But it's definitely sealed up, and I went all the way around the whole outside, all the way down on the sides and around the top. It takes quite a bit of effort to get the sealant to go through this little tip, but I think it's worth it because you can barely even see the sealant in there. All right, next up is the door. So on this 2020 or newer View and Navion, the door had some pretty serious issues. So the main issue with this door are these hinges right here, and what happens is that they can seize up. And what happens is there's a stainless steel pin that runs from here all the way down through here. This is a fixed hinge that's fixed to the motorhome side, and these hinges on the top and the bottom here rotate with the door. And the issue is the pin is made out of stainless steel and the hinges are made out of aluminum. And those are dissimilar metals, and so what happens is that when those two metals are in contact, they cause a galvanic reaction which corrodes the aluminum. And the issue is that there's such a tight fit between the pin, the stainless steel pin, and the aluminum hinge that if any material gets in there, it'll bind up and eventually it'll seize. And what makes it worse is that if water gets in there, and on the outside you can see that the hinge is open to the outside, so it's real easy for water to get into that joint, and the water accelerates that galvanic corrosion. And so the fix is to remove the hinge here take these two bolts out, and this hinge just slides off. And I cleaned that stainless steel shaft with some 600 grit sandpaper, and I used a Q-tip with some alcohol and cleaned out the inside of this hinge. It was pretty dry on this one. And then I used some anti-seize compound to goop that up pretty good to make it move in and out. I think this is a must-do mod because when I first read about it, I thought, oh, the door opens just fine. But then when I decided to actually lubricate it, this one hinge here was completely frozen. I had to pound this pretty hard to get the hinge off. And I was really lucky that I did it just when I did it, or else the hinge would have probably failed and it would have broke right here. And when that happens, it's a real pain because you have to replace the hinge, and the hinge is also painted the same color as the outside of the RV, so you have to actually paint the outside of the hinge. So definitely a must-do mod if you have one of these. Okay, so the other thing I did with this door is center it in the opening. On this RV, this gap here was a lot less than the gap on the other side here. So what I did is I measured this gap here and I measured that gap. I added those two together, divided that number by 2, and that gave me the nominal gap, and I subtracted this gap here from that nominal gap, and that told me how much the shim needed to be. And what the shim is it's a spacer. You can see it right in here. I painted it the same color as the outside. But the shim spaces the door this way. So now the gap is the same on both sides, here and here, because I had some light shining in through the top and it didn't seal anything. So the hinge, you can see right here is the spacer that goes between there. So it's just, in my case, it was an 1/8 inch spacer, and I just made it out of aluminum I got from Home Depot. And then I just drilled 2 holes in it and put these screws in. I had to use a little bit longer screws because the spacer was an 1/8 inch longer, and these are special low profile head screws that I used. Also, to make the switches work right in here, I had to add some washers to space these contact switches out, as well as down here there's some washers to add this switch sensor out so it would touch this magnet here on the door. Okay, moving back, next up is the water heater door. So what happens on this, and I've seen some pictures of it, where the door, this latch can open, and sometimes the door can fall open, and then when you're driving, the wind just rips it off. And that can be a pretty expensive repair because you can buy a new door, but then you also have to have it painted to match the RV. So to fix that, or to prevent that from happening, I just added a stainless steel screw here. Now this door you really don't have to access very often, maybe once when you descale the water heater, but not very often at all. So the way I did that was, there are screws that run along here that hold this panel here to the side of the RV. And so I removed this center screw and I just measured down from the top to where that hole was, and then over to the side where it was, and then drilled a hole in this and just used a longer stainless steel screw. So that should prevent this from ever falling off. All right, next up, per Grandpa Ron, I added this seal here, and it's really, all it is a piece of adhesive backed EVA foam, and it's about 1/8 of an inch thick or so, and I just stuck it on there and it seals up the door. Problem here is there's a little gap here between this and that. I don't know if there was original seal there, so when you go around corners the water leaks out quite a bit, and this seals it up so it doesn't leak at all. I've read some accounts of some people having their entire exhaust system ripped off after running over a truck tire retread. And I noticed there were quite a few of those in the road last trip we took on a major highway. And so I think what's happening is the retread hits the pipe, the exhaust pipe, and breaks the little small little rubber supports that hold it up. And then I think what's happening is the pipe, the whole exhaust system falls down on the ground and drags, and then gets sucked under the rear tire, and that's what rips it off. So what I did was I made a couple brackets. It's kind of hard to see in there, but basically it goes up to the top there, and it's just a piece of sheet metal with a bracket and a pipe clamp. So I think a 3-inch pipe, and that holds the outside. Also, I pulled it up so it's fairly close to the body here, and that gives more clearance to the ground for curbs. And I cut it back a little bit so it's not sticking out quite so far, to help reduce getting it caught on a curb. This next one is more of a tip than a mod. These steps are prone to failure. One of the ways they can fail is if you open the door and it hits a curb, or I think the motor can fail. I carry a spare motor just in case that happens, but you can also undo a couple of the bolts and just take the step off if the motor ever fails, and at least you could get home and still use it without the steps being stuck in an out position. So I'll climb under there and show you what I'm talking about. Okay, we're under the RV now, looking at the step mechanism. Motor is over there, and so the bolts I was talking about is there's one right here and there's one right up there. If you remove those two bolts, this uses a 14 millimeter wrench, and on the other side right here it's a 6 millimeter Allen wrench. So if you remove those two, that will remove the entire step from the RV, and you could put that inside and still drive it just fine. Okay, since we're under here, I've read some accounts of some people having some problems with their step, where the wires would get caught in the gears. And these are the step wires up here, and those are the gears right there. And sure enough, when I looked under here, the wires on this RV were hanging down right next to the gears. They didn't get caught in there, but it was probably just a matter of time. So what I did is I added some zip ties up in here, and then way over on this side over here to hold those wires up out of the way. Okay, next up is the bracket for the black and gray tank dump system. This RV didn't have a bracket originally from the factory, so I had to make one. The pipe system is only supported by this, or at least on mine, it was only supported by this coupling here, and then the other coupling over here was the only thing that was supporting this whole tube system. So I made a bracket out of a conduit coupling bracket here, and I added some rubber and used some contact cement to glue the rubber piece to that strap, to that conduit strap. And then I added a piece of steel here, a strap that just runs from here up, and it bolts on up underneath up there to an existing bolt. Okay, so by far the best improvement or upgrade that we've done is adding the Hellwig Sway Bar and the Fox shocks. This is a sway bar right here, and the shocks are up in there. I don't know if you can see them up there, right up there. So what the sway bar does is it reduces the sway or the body roll. So when you go, like for example, when you go out of a driveway and the RV wants to roll to one side, what's happening is one side of this bar is lifting up with the side of the RV that's rolling, and the other side over there is pushing down. And what that does is it twists this bar right here. So the stiffer that bar is, the less sway or roll you'll get. Now this bar is, this Hellwig Sway Bar is 1.5 inches in diameter, and I measured the one that we took off was 1.35 inches in diameter. Now I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but the stiffness of that bar increases with the 4th power of the diameter. So basically what that means is this sway bar is 1.5 times stiffer than the stock sway bar. So that reduces the amount of sway by quite a bit. And what the shocks do is they slow that, they dampen that motion out, so it's not as violent if you're going out of a driveway. It's a lot smoother. Also at highway speeds, it's a lot more comfortable to drive because there's less swaying back and forth. Like if you get passed by a big rig or something, it doesn't move the RV back and forth, and it's a lot easier to drive. Now this is kind of a personal preference upgrade, I think, because we put about 1,000 miles on this RV before we did this upgrade, and it drove just fine. I mean, in the stock configuration it works great, but I think with this upgrade it just drives more stable, and it's easier and more pleasant to drive. So it's definitely worth the upgrade for us. Okay, well, we're under here. It's probably a good time to talk about the drive shaft. So on these 2019 or newer Sprinter chassis, they use an electronic shifting, which means that the engine has to be running to be able to put the transmission, to take it out of park or put it in neutral so you can tow it. Otherwise, if the engine's not running, it's locked in park and you can't rotate the rear wheels. So if you ever break down and your engine doesn't run, you have to disconnect the drive shaft to be able to tow it. And to disconnect the drive shaft, you have to take off these 4 bolts right there. Now those bolts are special, take a special wrench, which is called an E14, and that's like an inverse Torx wrench. I don't know if you can see, it's different than a normal bolt. And so what I did is I painted those red for one thing, and then I zip tied an extra wrench I had up on the top there, painted it red. So this, I know this is way overkill of doing this, but it's at least a good idea to know about it and to have that E14 wrench or a socket in your toolkit. Okay, next up is the solar panels. I removed the 200 watt flexible panels and installed 6 100 watt Renogy panels. And it looks like I just caught them just in time. Right here you can see a little bit of cracking of flexible panels. The issue with those is they're black and they're very close to the top surface of the RV, and so it gets really hot, and that heat can damage the gel coat on top here, and it looks like it cracked it just a little bit. I'm not sure if that's a big issue long term, but I think I caught it just in time. It doesn't seem to be damaged too much. And to mount these panels onto the top, the roof here, I just made some brackets out of aluminum, and I used the 3M double-sided tape to attach it to the roof, and then sealed around those. Okay, also while we're up here, this is the top cover for the fan in the kitchen, and I've seen some pictures of people that lost that cover, and basically this cover just unscrews like this, and when I checked mine, it was almost off. It turned about a quarter turn and it would have fallen off. So I unscrewed it and I put some blue Loctite on the threads and then screwed it back on and tightened it up, so that hopefully it'll keep that from falling off. And I mounted this charge controller under the bed here, right next to the water heater. I added a solar disconnect switch, which I can disconnect the solar panels, and then the charge controller I mounted right on the side here, and it's a Victron MPPT 100 volt by 50 amp charge controller. All right, here's the battery monitor. It's a Victron BMV 712, and I removed the original ZAMP charge controller. I just made this little piece of wood here to cover up the big hole, and then added this charge control or battery monitor. So this RV came with the lithium battery package from the factory, and it's the Lithionics batteries. And you can see right here is where I added the shunt for the Victron battery monitor. And right here is the Mega Fuse. Now on this one, they installed the wrong one at the factory, and this one is a 125 amp, it looks like, and the correct one is supposed to be a 300 amp. I think it could blow if we ever run the air conditioning and the microwave, or maybe the cooktop at the same time, and which we have not done yet, and we haven't blown this fuse. But just in case, I bought a couple extra ones. I have one in my tool bag, and then one here I zip tied right here, just in case this one ever blows, we can just replace it with that one. Also, I printed this LED indicator right here. On each battery, there's an indicator that indicates the status. So I just went on their website and printed the LED indicator blink pattern. So if we ever have any issues, we can just refer to that quickly. I just keep that, just lay it down right there. Okay, this next one's more of a tip, I guess, than a mod. On these awnings, the motor is susceptible to failure. On this one, we're actually on a second motor right now. And if you ever have the awning extended and the motor dies, I'll show you how to roll it back in. You take this cover off right here. There's a screw right down in there. Use a Phillips screwdriver, take that off, and this cover here comes off. And then use just a regular 3/8 ratchet like that. Goes into this hole right there. You can see how the awning is out right now. If I twist it like that, you can get it to roll all the way back in. And so if you're ever stuck and you need to get the awning in, you can just do that to retract it. Okay, next up is the surge protector. I added a Progressive Industries surge protector. This is the hardwired version. They also make a portable one that you can just connect up to the end of the plug here, and then it connects to the pedestal outlet. But I decided to just hardwire it in here, and I relocated the transfer switch, which is right here, on, and then mounted the surge protector on a piece of wood right here, so they both fit against the side there, and there's still enough room for the cable to fit back in there. Okay, that's it for part 1. Check out part 2 for some more mods.